Hi,
What's up, Marlena?
how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Look at all those guitars. Oh my goodness.
So many guitars. Where were the violas?
Yeah, I know. I should have like a wall of violas.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me about these guitars you have behind you?
Yeah. What do you want to know about my guitars?
I want to know their history and their what are they to you? What do you use them for?
Guitar was my main principal instrument. Started off with piano as a child and into my teenage years, but then as I grew interested in metal, I picked up the guitar, and that became my principal instrument. And now, actually, not long before COVID started, it was around January or February of 2020. For years I'd been kind of working on integrating my metal background into my classical music, but just over a year ago, I started to rediscover my passion for the guitar, got a bunch of new gear. And so these came out, and I've been active and recording and writing music that involves a lot of guitar. So I have my mandolin over here. I have my first electric guitar, Helen. That's a 6-string Ibanez.
Helen?
I call her Helen. I named her after my grandmother. Beautiful guitar that I've had since I was like 13 or 14. This is the 7-string equivalent, same kind of model, but newer. I got that one last year.
What's that? What's her name?
Her name is Blood Sky.
Blood Sky. Wow.
The guitars I'm writing on, their the color schemes tend to influence the colors I see in the music that I'm writing, and harmony and stuff like that. So I tend to be quite color focused in that sense, in terms of what instrument I'm writing on.
Does it help you to sort of personalize the guitars when they have names?
It's more like they let me know what their name is after time. I'm not the one personalizing them.
You don't impose the name.
I don't impose the name. No.
You said earlier that each guitar, the coloring affects what music you write for it. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you could expand on what you mean by that, because that was a very interesting comment.
So to be clear, I don't have synesthesia.
Okay.
I don't think I do. And I don't have perfect pitch. So it's, how would I describe it? It's, as one can intuit, even if they're not themselves a composer or a creative artist, if you will, one can imagine that the visual and sonic landscape that surrounds the literal head of an artist in the midst of creation will in some way influence them. Mm-hmm. The kinds of sounds they're hearing, the kind of colors and light levels and objects, and just kind of the composition of the visual field in some way impacts them and will influence kind of their cognitive process, conscious or unconscious, as they're creating. And when I'm writing on the guitar or at the piano, the instrument is what I'm looking at as I'm noodling around and exploring and trying things out and moving the fingers around. So, of course, the color of it is part of my visual field. And the stuff I already have imagined, already have composed, already have audiated on that instrument is now in my mind tied to the look, the visual field that I have in front of me with that instrument. So now the things that I'm currently writing and exploring on the instrument are in some way linked conceptually to things I had already written. So particular harmonies, particular riffs, chord progressions, melodies, whatever it is that I, even techniques that I tend to use on certain instruments just because of the way they're constructed, will tend to be kind of subtly, subconsciously evoked every time I hold that instrument. Mm-hmm. And therefore that's influencing in some way what I'm writing. And I tend to associate certain keys with certain instruments based on their colors. So now I see D minor, for instance, or D major minor, whatever, the D world in a kind of yellowish orange color, very similar to that, because I usually have that instrument in drop D tuning, which means a lot of the music I end up writing tends to be very D-centric and so on. Right. That instrument I have it tuned most of the time to G sharp minor, more or less, drop tuning. So I now picture G sharp minor as a kind of blend of black, purple, and crimson.
Very cool. I really, really relate to what you're saying. I haven't heard someone articulate it the way you are, because I feel the same way. I don't think I have synesthesia in the true nature of that, but I discovered somewhat recently that there's something called spatial synesthesia, which I may have some tendencies towards. And it's sort of related to what you're saying, where you make connections between colors. And for me, it would be like numbers or seasons or days of the week or months of the year. And for me, ever since I was a little kid, I always saw the year in, it sounds weird, but in like a colored oval in my mind.
As in like the year it's inside a border, an oval border?
It's like the months of the year make up the oval.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and where we are in the year is where I feel, it's hard to explain. It's where I see myself mentally on the oval.
In the trajectory of the oval, yeah. So after as of July, you're on the way back to the beginning of the oval.
Exactly. So if I were to draw it in the air right now, it would be like summer would be here, and like March is like here, and then December would be up here. So it goes like this. So right now we're like here. It's interesting, and it's not something I've ever purposefully evoked. I've never purposely thought, how can I conceptualize, the months of the year? No, it's just every time someone says the word Wednesday, the image of that oval pops in my head. Oh, I'll see you on Sunday. I'll go, oh yeah. And it's just there because it's like a place where Sunday exists in my mind where I can locate it. Yeah. So I never questioned it. And one day I just thought, oh, that's really like, I think I tried to explain it to someone. And as I was talking, I was like, this sounds crazy. I'm like, and so I think I Googled something like seeing months on a colored oval in your head or something very spot on. And spatial synesthesia came up, where there's this pattern with circular imagery, because I also have the same sort of thing with the days of the week and with numbers. Although numbers, it's not a circle for some reason, it's just like a big timeline. So I guess because of the human lifespan, I think of it as being 100. And so 100 is sort of the last number that exists on this mental.
Everything you're talking about here and the associations, the visual and conceptual association you're making is exactly what I'm talking about. I don't know if, I'm sure we're not unique in that. Probably every human in some way or another, but totally makes sense to me.
Okay. Like I think there are a lot of people who might experience it, but not analyze it or think about it.
Right. Until they're in a podcast and then they can't talk about anything else.
Well, even when I'm trying to articulate these things, it's so abstract that it just ends up sounding not fully formulated, because you're trying to bring an experience that is so intimate and so
unspoken.
Your inner world is not, it's really hard to sort of articulate that.
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell me a bit about what you were like as a teenager when you were into metal? Like what did that look like?
Long hair, all black clothing, lots of chains and studs, and the various aesthetic markers of whatever group one identifies with and belongs in. Even though I don't do the obvious metal, like 80s, 90s metal look anymore, still plenty of metal aesthetic somewhere in there.
Yeah, it exists in your soul.
It most definitely does. Yeah, in many ways that I'm sure can be obnoxious to certain people.
Are there character things too that go along with that?
Sure. Predisposition to being overly serious and dramatic about certain things. A deep antipathy and aggression towards anything to do with religion.
Mm.
Generally being relatively cynical and critical about things. You know, I mean, those are not exclusive to metalheads, but those are among the kind of personality markers. A lot of us tend to be nerds. I've recently gotten into Dungeons and Dragons of all things, and been learning that there's long been an association between metal and D&D. The reason why nerds like myself ended up in that world is the impression that, oh yeah, I'll be more like Batman or Wolverine, you know, my comic book heroes at the time, you know, the badass loner types, if I can be like those guys, you know. Growing up as like in elementary school, I only knew Greek music because that's all that was played in the household. The Greek radio station was on at all times. Classical music because I was studying classical piano from the age of 4, and oldies pop, like 50s to 70s, kind of golden oldies, because that's the only radio station that my bus driver in elementary school ever played. For 6 years, to school and back home was golden oldies for an hour each way.
And this was in Montreal.
And this was in Montreal.
Okay.
So already, yeah, you know, I lived in an Italian suburb in, you know, French Canada and in a Greek household. And so I didn't know a lot of like contemporary pop music of the continent of the US and Canada. So eventually I, you know, when I was old enough to start requesting specific pieces of music from my father, I had asked him to go get me some tapes or CDs. So among my first were Beatles and Beach Boys, and then Michael Jackson. Fell in love with Michael Jackson. Dangerous album, which was harder, and Slash played on one of the tracks. So that started to kindle like, oh, this is what modern pop music is like. And
how old were you when you discovered Michael Jackson?
Dangerous was 91, so I would have been like 9 years old.
Okay.
8, 9 years old. And then, yeah, went to high school and continued to just be the nerdy kid who also happened to be a jock. But gradually I started to befriend some other people who were listening to Metallica, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Pantera, heavy music. First through grunge, actually, Nirvana and Bush and Soundgarden and whatnot. But increasingly, as maybe many fans of heavy music would tell you or would reveal in their listening trajectories, it's kind of like cilantro. You know, if you don't like cilantro at some point, but you try it and eventually you develop a taste for it, then there's never enough cilantro. Then I heard, oh yeah, I had a friend who was running the radio, one of the radio stations or radio programs at my high school, and he would play a lot of metal, and he was really into that world more than I was. And he put on something that sounded absolutely insane. The vocalist sounded like a witch, an angry but very precise witch, like super tight, almost like rap-like vocals, but it is really high. That introduced me to a harder style of progressive metal, which is a subgenre of metal that's kind of known for complex rhythm and meter, complex song forms, more virtuosic, tends to bring in elements of classical, jazz, fusion, whatever, other musical genres and compositional techniques and playing techniques. And I had started getting to Dream Theater, kind of the leading progressive metal band in the 90s, certainly. And yeah, that led me down the nerd metal side of things, which was all about increasingly complex technical music that also happened to be really aggressive, as is kind of the key marker of metal. And that's what led me, you know, over many years then of, you know, playing in bands, writing metal music, producing, touring, eventually led me to going to study composition in college, because, you know, the aspirations of a classical composer and of a metal songwriter producer kind of align once you start to realize it over time.
So tell me about that. How do they align? Like, how did you go from, you played in bands?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was it sounds like that was your whole musical life almost. Okay, so how did you go from that point to wanting to study classical composition?
Yeah. So yeah, that was my musical life, was definitely doing the metal thing. And after my first college studies in the liberal arts, I went and did audio engineering. So I was also taking the technical path to support my music making mainly, but also ended up just working, doing recording as an audio engineer, studio production. I worked in radio for a year while doing the metal thing and developing my own band. I was always the kind of the band leader in most of the bands I played in. And then around the age of 23 or 24, I started feeling like I was hitting a bit of a wall as a composer, as a songwriter, in that I had meticulously avoided learning anything about music theory besides what one learns incidentally from studying piano throughout their lives from childhood. So I read music and all that, but I didn't know structure. I didn't know the theoretical side of things. I was stubborn about it, as many autodidactic composers are. Like, no, learning theory will destroy my creativity and I'll end up stuck in a box and that sort of thing. But as my compositions were getting longer and more complicated and more ambitious in scope and technicality, eventually I started feeling like I was probably being held back by insisting on recreating, reinventing composition on my own, when we have literally centuries of studies, of analysis of music to look at, from which one can learn and kind of expand one's repertoire, one's knowledge, one's abilities. And also I discovered the Rachmaninoff and Stravinsky, particularly the Rite of Spring and Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony and the Piano Concerti. And while still writing my metal stuff, but realizing like I couldn't grasp that music well enough. It was beyond my ken. And I decided, you know what, I should just go study, just to, again, enhance my abilities as a metal songwriter and producer. And went to Vanier College first, classical guitar and composition while I was there, and kind of became addicted to it. And decided to go to McGill, again, with a vague thought that, yeah, I'll still be doing the metal thing, but I got addicted to being able to write, create, imagine absolutely anything without worrying about the performative limitations. As I was realizing in the classical side of things, anything I wrote, well, I'm not performing it. These amazing professional musicians who have also been doing that since they were 3 or 4 years old, just execute it, like no problems. Yeah, I sit in rehearsals and give some notes, but ultimately they come in prepared, already know the stuff, and just execute it. And it was very liberating and addicting.
What bands or albums would you recommend?
Number one, Opeth. With metal, the biggest barrier to entry is, for one thing, harmonic saturation. The high degree of distortion in the guitars, often in the vocals, whether it's more of a screaming or growling type of vocal or melodic vocal. There's a lot of distortion in just everything. It's loud, it's heavy, it's dense. The brain needs to rewire itself to be able to even parse the important things. What are the layers? What are the individual elements that are going on? What are the melodies that are going on in these guitars that at first listen, for somebody whose brain is not yet wired for such heavy music, it just seems like a wall of noise. That's often how it's described. It's just noise, right? That's why I made the kind of cilantro comparison earlier. It's one of those things that once the synapses and neurons are just in the right place where it starts to make sense and the brain can parse it and decipher the sound into meaningful layers and cognitive experience, then it's a drug. It's like, holy shit, this sounds awesome. Now I want the next most dense or aggressive or complex thing. Which is why many people start with kind of more mainstream, easy, a more accessible sounding metal. In the 90s, when I was starting, it was Metallica. That was like the thing to get into. This was a Billboard charting band, so clearly they were doing something that made them particularly accessible and listenable. Opeth is that band of the last 20 years. Even though they started as a straight up death metal band, they were always very melodic. A lot of their kind of Swedish folk music and melodicism was imbued in their music. And even though it was very aggressive and harsh, they gradually became more and more progressive metal. Again, that seems to be a trajectory that a lot of my favorite bands followed. So a lot more clean vocals and acoustic guitars and beautiful layers and synths and orchestral instruments and stuff like that. Absolutely Opeth. But I want to say Periphery, Tesseract, Animals as Leaders, Leprous, and Pain of Salvation are currently some of the most impressive music I see being made.
Are those bands that you're listening to right now kind of thing?
Yes, and obsessively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I noticed that you use the word like obsessively, addicted, these kind of things. So is that because you are sort of this, you get very focused into?
Yeah, frighteningly so. I'm a very, I definitely would describe myself as an addictive personality. Collector type, completionist, various terms surrounding that idea. I grew up collecting comic books, and I'm that kind of person who wants to have every issue of every series that I'm interested in, and that sort of thing. Once I get into something, now, as I mentioned earlier, I've been getting into Dungeons and Dragons. Well, I studied the hell now out of Dungeons and Dragons for like 3 months before even starting to play with groups.
Yeah.
Just I have to know everything.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a gift though. That's really good.
It can be a problem that could lead to very real addictions in the vice sense of it.
Right.
Which I've been fortunate to not, except for tobacco, but I could definitely see how it could have been a problem, especially while I was still, in the band world and playing concerts, in the metal world. I listen a lot to a very small number of things. And very little to a large number of things. Like I look at my iTunes playlist and I have like 150 listens of the Juggernaut double album by Periphery. To show how obsessive I am. That album came out in 2016 and that stat was from 2017. So in 1 year, I listened to a 2-hour album for 150 times.
It's funny you should say that, because I've been thinking about that recently. That's how I listen to, is when I discover like an album I like, I try and make it an album as opposed to, I don't like this kind of song culture. I don't like that at all. But not to sound like a total snob, but
you totally sounded like a snob, and I appreciated it.
Yeah, I find myself really listening to it on repeat, because sometimes like some songs will, or I guess pieces too, if you're talking classical, but like will really grab you right away. And then others, it's almost like you need to massage them, like orally.
Acquire the taste.
Yes. I was just on my phone going through some metal song titles.
Okay.
And I thought it would be fun to say some of them out loud and see if you know the band.
Ooh,
you want to try?
I'm totally down to try. Just as a forewarning to yourself and your listeners, I'm not good at titles and lyrics. I have what I call lyric blindness.
Did you just make up that diagnosis?
Well, I made it up some time ago, but yeah, I've self-diagnosed as lyric blind. I have no idea what anybody's ever singing about. I just hear it as part of the texture.
That makes sense. Let's see. What about Freak on a Leash?
Oh, I know I should know this. This is embarrassing. Corn?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice. Okay. Wait and Bleed.
No. Just gonna guess. Slayer.
Slipknot.
Oh, that does sound like a Slipknot title now that you mentioned.
Children of the Grave.
Oh, Children of the Grave is Black Sabbath. That's Dio era Black Sabbath.
Yes.
Yeah. All
Okay,
right.
cool.
Well, that was fun.
Did you grow up speaking Greek?
Grew up speaking Greek. That was my first spoken language, then music, then French, and then English.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I grew up in an actual Greek family, an immigrant family, and Greek was my first language, and I went to Greek school. But it's no longer my first language by any means. It's not I'm not comfortable in the language. I can still speak it and read it and write it, but not well. And I'm concerned when I do have children, will I be able to transfer that on? Will I be comfortable enough to be able to lace it into daily life so that they could also grow up learning Greek, which I think has been really helpful in a variety of ways in my own life. And I only took my first trip to Greece just a couple months before you came to New York, I believe. I was in Athens where I had gotten commissioned by the Elson, Ελληνική Συμφωνική Orchestra Neon. So Greek Youth Symphony Orchestra, I think, is what it officially is translated as. So they had commissioned an orchestral work. I'd never been to Greece. My family was always too poor to send me back, and they had kind of severed ties, or most of the family had moved to Canada anyway, so there was not much reason to go back or something. I don't know. So my first opportunity was as a composer who got to have an orchestral work premiered in Athens at the Stafylakis Hall, which is this beautiful modern foundation and art center, kind of the Lincoln Center of Athens. As well as in Thessaloniki, a city further to the north. So I got to travel with the youth orchestra on the bus, going from city to city and seeing the country and the mountains.
That must have been a really incredible trip.
It was mind-blowing. It was awesome. They were reteaching me Greek too, as we were hanging out and going to the bars and learning the nightlife from the youth. They were all in their 20s. So I got to be the not too old, older composer who was young, hanging out with the young musicians. And so I spent, I think about a week working with the orchestra. And then when we got back to Athens, we parted ways. I stayed for another week and a half or so. One of my best friends, the cellist for whom I wrote my cello suite, Toby Kuhn, joined me. He was at the time I forget where he was living, Belgium or the UK somewhere. And he joined me in Athens. We rented a car and we drove around the country and discovered my long lost family, just drove into, a basically unmarked village without street names, and just walked up to people asking, using the family names from both sides of my family as kind of introductions. They're like, oh, come meet your cousins and your uncles. And
really
found my mother's childhood home, my grandmother's home,
wow.
My mother hadn't been back to Greece in 40 years. And then we took the ferry overnight from Athens after doing the continent, the mainland, we took the ferry to Crete, landed in the old Venetian port in Chania at like 6 a.m., just at dawn on Christmas Day. And we got to see the sunrise by ourselves in this beautiful, like kind of Venetian port city in Crete. Got a lot of really beautiful photos of Toby and his cello. And we did the same thing again. We just happened to run in to some cousins.
Wow.
And had Christmas lunch with people and played music. And
I bet you got a lot of invitations.
Nonstop. Yeah. And Toby does not speak Greek, only a bit of ancient Greek because his father was a poet and a scholar. But he had his cello and was happy to just like tour around with me and talk to people through music. It was amazing. Wow. 2 weeks. We stayed for up until New Year's. And then I went back a few months later for another festival that I was invited to I can't think of a beautiful city, port city, off the top of my head right now, but and I brought my mother for her first return to Greece in 40 years and did kind of a similar thing, rented a car and just drove everywhere.
How is she feeling being back?
Blown away, scared as hell because she didn't even know who was still alive from her childhood. She left when she was 13.
Wow.
hadn't seen her, the home she grew up in Patra, and since she was a child and all of that. So yeah, it was a very emotional and powerful journey. And she redeveloped connections with her former best friend and
Wow.
family members and cousins and nieces and nephews and all that. I grew up in Greek culture in Canada, but I went to Greek school and Greek church and all the Greek stuff and ancient Greek history, and grew up with the Greek myths, not with American or Canadian nursery rhymes and stories, but with the Greek ones. I was hearing about Theseus and Hercules as a child. But I wasn't expecting that. As soon as I got out of the airport for the first time in Athens, I saw the stone and saw the Acropolis and the Parthenon looming over the city from the cab as we were driving into the city. It like shook me. Like I felt grounded, like, oh my God, this is my people.
Wow.
This is my land. I did not expect that kind of connection.
Wow.
Especially given how much of a hardcore atheist and anti-spiritualist I am. So anything that smacks of a hippy dippy gobbledygook immediately turns me off. And I don't relate this to that, but it almost touched on that. It was like, I feel the land under my feet. Part of that experience is as I come off the plane, I'm seeing Greek written everywhere. That's not an experience I've ever had in my personal life of walking in through an airport of any building and it's Greek signs everywhere. Even in the Greek community in Montreal, the buildings follow, Quebec regulations, so everything's in French with English. Kind of thing. So that just seeing the language everywhere on the signs, the people who all look like, everybody looks like the people I just knew from the Greek community. Right. The particular hair patterns and colors and skin and all that. And the imagery of the Parthenon and the Acropolis, that's so ingrained as that is our ancient history of our people. Even, as an adult, and when I studied the liberal arts and whatever, I was into philosophy and started with the pre-Socratics and ancient Greek philosophy and whatnot. So it's just such an integrated part of my intellectual life throughout my life that seeing it in person is bound to be striking.
Yeah. We met through the 3D string theory project.
That's right.
It seems like there might be a link in some ways between what you described as your love for metal and that kind of music, and then this innovation, technological man versus machine kind of piece. I suppose there could have been multiple ways to interpret, but I thought the way you interpreted that worked so well. It was a lot of fun.
Well, amongst other things, as a kid, comic book guy, but as an adult, science fiction. I'm a huge science fiction nerd, which again ties into the progressive metal aesthetics and my love of science and technology and engineering and all of those things. So yeah, totally. It was right up my alley. And the concept for that, the piece was called Singularity, and it was very much, I think I actually was talking about it at the time as a sci-fi oratorio for 3D printed string octet and orchestra. Alain and I had a long conversation over the phone, and we're exploring different kind of themes and concepts, and that seemed like a natural fit. It just came out naturally. Like, oh yeah, do the science fiction thing, and man versus machine and AI taking over.
So when you heard the instruments, was that a surprise, or how did you find the actual sound?
I mean, it was, I wouldn't say surprised. I heard several iterations. Of course, the instruments were being developed. Yeah, it was definitely different sounding, close to the real thing, not quite as good. But that wasn't the point.
No, yeah.
The point was more, can we make this work? Can it be made to work conceptually within a piece of music without it sounding like a compromise in some way?
Well, and I think it was the first ever performance of its kind. I, to my knowledge.
The scope of it, of doing it on this large scale with orchestra, certainly was a first.
Yeah, which is very cool. It's very cool to think about where that could go.
Yeah. It was cool to see how much attention it was getting to from like tech websites and journals and stuff like that. It seemed to be capturing people's interest.
How has the pandemic been for you? Have you been composing much?
I've been composing a lot and producing, recording a lot. So, of course, with the kind of disappearance of the concert music industry, let's say the hibernation, it coincided with my kind of rekindling of my passion for guitar and writing metal. So I've been writing, recording, producing my portrait album of chamber music, of metal influenced chamber music for New Amsterdam Records. So I have this portrait album that hopefully will be coming out next year. Things have been slowed down because of the pandemic, but it's in the process. And parallel to that, I've been writing an album's worth of metal music with myself as singer and guitarist, and I'll eventually bringing in guest vocalists and instrumentalists and whatever. So I'm doing both of those in parallel. Did a recording with the Hard Rubber Orchestra of my piece for like basically metal band and jazz orchestra, like big band. So that's another album that'll be coming out soon, and there'll be 2 music videos of my piece on that with me playing guitar on it.
Cool.
So yeah, I've been doing stuff like that, and we're working now with Courtney Swain. We're collaborating on a piece. Courtney Swain is the lead singer of a progressive rock / metal band, Bent Knee. So she and I are co-composing and recording a sort of suite, a long piece or a short suite for her as vocalist, me and guitars, and the hip hop chamber ensemble Shout House here in New York.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so that's a project I've been really excited about, and we've been working together on it for 6 months now, I think.
You're making me want to move to New York.
It's really fun here.
Yeah.
It feels musically so much more open-minded than was my experience in Montreal or maybe in Canada.
Not surprising.
Yeah.
You feel like you're kind of there to stay?
I've been here. This August will be my 10-year anniversary in New York. I feel like people who've been here 10 years tend to stick around. That's certainly my intention. But if something takes me somewhere else, that's what will happen.
Yeah.
But I'm 38, so I'm not looking for an excuse to start a new life in another location. Yeah. This is where my life is, for the last decade. So there'd have to be a very good reason to leave. Not least not just because I'm established here, but I fucking love the city. I've been asked the same questions many, many times in interviews and podcasts and whatever. And without meaning to, you just are asked a lot of the same things and respond with the same things because it's true, or at least you think it's true. That eventually kind of hones down into like this kind of perfected packaged response that immediately gets triggered whenever the keywords in the question come up, which is why I especially did not want to prepare for something like this. And I appreciate your style that you're just kind of picking at individual things. I've spoken about today about things that I've spoken about many times, but never in this way. So,
well, I'm glad to hear that. Well, I feel like I could talk to you for a really long time, but I want to be mindful of your time.
It has been very fun, Marlena. Nice.
It has been really fun. Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And
Bye.
Cheers.